The 4 ways. Immortality is not a property with which we are born, however one can acquire immortality. All existing and generally known ways to immortality can be divided into 3 categories. 1. The way of the fakir. 2. The way of the monk. 3. The way of the yogi. The way of the fakir is the way of struggle with our physical body, the way of work in the first room. This is a long, difficult and uncertain way. The fakir strives to develop physical will power over their body. This is attained by means of terrible suffering, through torturing the body. The whole way of the fakir consists of various incredibly difficult physical exercises. The fakir either stands motionless in the same position for hours, days, months, or even years, or sits with outstretched arms on a bare stone in sun, rain, and snow. Perhaps tortures themselves with fire, puts their legs into an ant heap and so on. If they do not succumb and fall ill or die before what may be called physical will is developed in them, then they attain the 4th room, or the possibility of forming the 4th body. But all of their other functions, emotional, intellectual and so forth, remain undeveloped. They have acquired will power, but have nothing to which they can apply it. They cannot make use of it for gaining knowledge or for self-perfection, and as a rule they are too old to begin new work. However, where there are schools of fakirs, there are also schools of yogis. Yogis generally keep an eye on fakirs. If a fakir attains what they have aspired to, before they are too old, they take that person into a yogi school, where first they heal them and restore their power of movement, then begin to teach them. A fakir has to learn to walk, and to speak like a baby. But they now possess a will which has overcome incredible difficulties on their way, and this will may help them to overcome the difficulties on the second part of the journey, the difficulties, namely of developing their intellectual and emotional functions. We cannot imagine what hardships fakirs undergo. Perhaps you have seen real fakirs, as for example one fakir seen at the inner court of a temple in India, spending day and night for 20 years, standing on the tips of fingers and toes, until they are no longer able to straighten themselves. Their pupils carry them from one place to another, take them to the river and wash them like some inanimate object. But this was not attained all at once. Think what they had to overcome, what torture they must have suffered in order to get to that stage. Someone becomes a fakir not because they understand the possibilities and the results of this way, not because of religious feeling. In all Eastern countries where fakirs exist, there is a custom among the common people of promising to give to fakirs a child born after some happy event. Besides this, fakirs often adopt orphans, or simply buy little children from poor parents. These children become their pupils, and imitate them, some only outwardly, but some afterwards become fakirs themselves. In addition to these, other people become fakirs simply from being struck by someone they may have seen. Near every fakir in the temples, people can be seen who imitate them, who sit or stand in the same posture, not for long of course, but still, occasionally for several hours. And sometimes, it happens that an individual who went into the temple accidentally, on a feast day, and began to imitate some fakir who particularly struck them, does not return home anymore, but joins the crowd of that fakir's disciples, and later, in the course of time, becomes a fakir themselves. It must be understood though, that we take the word fakir in inverted commas. In Persia, fakir simply means a beggar, and in India, a great many jugglers call themselves fakirs. Europeans, particularly learned Europeans, very often give the name of fakir to yogis, as well as to monks of various wandering orders. But in reality, the way of the fakir, the way of the monk, and the way of the yogi are entirely different. So far we have examined fakirs, which is the first way. The second way is the way of the monk. This is the way of devotion to faith, the way of religious feeling and religious sacrifices. Only an individual with very strong religious emotions, and a very strong religious imagination, can become a monk or a nun, in the true sense of the word. The way of the monk is also very long and hard. A monk or nun spends years, and tens of years struggling with themselves, but all this work is concentrated on the second room, on the second body, that is, on feelings. Subjecting all of their other emotions to one emotion, namely, devotion to their faith. They develop unity in themselves as will, control of their emotions, and in this way they reach the 4th room. However, their physical body, and their thinking capacities, may remain entirely undeveloped. In order to be able to make use of what they have attained, they must develop the use and control of their body and their capacity to think. This can only be achieved by means of fresh sacrifices, fresh hardships, and fresh renunciations. Hence, a monk has to become a yogi and a fakir. However, very few get as far as this. The third way is the way of the yogi. This is the way of knowledge, the way of mind. The way of the yogi consists of working in the third room, and in striving to enter the fourth room by means of knowledge. The yogi reaches the fourth room by developing their mind and the control of their thoughts. However, the body and emotions may remain undeveloped in a corresponding way, and like the fakir and the monk, they may be unable to make use of the results of their attainments. In this case, though, they have the advantage of understanding their position, of knowing what they lack, what they must do, and in what direction they must go. All the ways, the way of the fakir as well as the way of the monk and of the yogi, have one thing in common. They all begin with the most difficult thing, with a complete change of life, with a renunciation of all worldly things. A person must give up their home, their family, their friends, and renounce all the pleasures, attachments and duties of life, then go out into the desert, or into a monastery, or a yogi school. From the very first day, from the very first step on their way, they must die to the world. Only thus can they hope to attain anything in one of these ways. The fourth way is different from the other three ways already considered, because the fourth way requires no retirement into the desert, nor does it require a person to give up and renounce everything by which they formerly have lived. The fourth way begins much further on than does the way of the yogi. This means that a person must be prepared for the fourth way, and this preparation embraces many different sides, so takes a long time. Furthermore, an individual must be living in conditions favorable for work in the fourth way, or, in any case, in conditions which do not render it impossible. It must be understood that both the inner and the external life of a person, there may be conditions which create insuperable barriers to the fourth way. Furthermore, the fourth way has no definite forms, like the ways of the fakir, the monk and the yogi. First of all, it has to be found, which is the first test. At the same time, the beginning of the fourth way is easier than the beginning of the ways of the fakir, the monk and the yogi. On the fourth way, it is possible to work, and to follow the way, while remaining in the usual conditions of life, continuing to do our usual work, earn a wage and preserve former relations with people, without renouncing or giving up anything. On the contrary, the conditions of life in which an individual is placed, at the beginning of their work, in which, so to speak, the work finds them, are the best possible for their path, at least at the beginning of the work. These conditions are natural for them. These conditions are the person themselves, because a person's life, and its conditions, correspond to what they are. Any conditions different from those created by life, would be artificial for a person, and in such artificial conditions, the work would not be able to touch every side of their being at once. This is very important to understand, when starting to observe and reflect upon one's situation. Thanks to this, the fourth way affects simultaneously every side of a person's being. It is work in 3 rooms all at once. The fakir works in the first room, the monk in the second, the yogi in the third. On reaching the fourth room, the fakir, the monk and the yogi leave behind them many things unfinished, and they cannot make full use of what they have attained, because they are not masters of all their functions. The fakir is master of their body, but not of the emotions or mind, which remain undeveloped. The monk or nun are masters of their emotions, but not of their body or their mind. The yogi is master of the mind, but not of the body or emotions. The fourth way differs from the other ways, in that the principal demand made upon an individual is the demand for understanding. We have to see things from the side of our personal experience. A person must do nothing they do not understand, except as an experiment, under the supervision and direction of a teacher. In the fourth way, the more a person understands what they are doing, the greater will be the result of their effort. This is a fundamental principle of the fourth way. The results of work in it are in proportion to the consciousness and understanding of the work. No faith is required in the fourth way. On the contrary, faith of any kind is opposed to the fourth way. In the fourth way, a person must see for themselves. They must satisfy themselves of the truth of what they are told. And until they are satisfied, and stop pushing back, they should do nothing. The method of the fourth way consists of doing something in one room and simultaneously doing something corresponding to it in the other two rooms. While working on the physical body, to work simultaneously on the mind and the emotions, then while working on the mind, to work on the physical body and the emotions. While working on the emotions, to work on the mind and on the physical body. This can be achieved thanks to the fact that in the fourth way, it is possible to make use of certain knowledge inaccessible to the ways of the fakir, the monk or the yogi. This knowledge makes it possible to work in three directions simultaneously. A whole parallel series of physical, mental and emotional effort and exercises serves this purpose. In addition, on the fourth way it is possible to individualize the work of each separate person, wherein each follower can only do what is necessary, and not what is useless for them. This is due to the fact that the fourth way dispenses with a great deal of what is superfluous, and preserved simply through tradition in the other ways. So that when an individual attains will, in the fourth way, they can make use of it, because they have acquired the necessary development and control of bodily, emotional and intellectual functions as well. Aside from this, they have saved a great deal of time, by working on the three sides of their being in a parallel manner, and so simultaneously. The fourth way is sometimes called the way of the sly one. The sly individual knows some secret which the fakir, monk and yogi do not know. How the sly one learned this is their secret. Perhaps they found it in some old book, perhaps inherited or were told it by an elder, perhaps they bought it, perhaps they stole it from someone. It makes no difference. The sly one knows the secret, and with its help outstrips the fakir, the monk and the yogi. Of the four, the fakir acts in the crudest manner. They know very little and understand very little. Let's suppose that after a whole month of intense torture, they develop in themselves a certain energy, a certain substance, which produces certain changes in them. They do this absolutely blindly, with their eyes shut, knowing neither aim, method nor results, and simply in imitation of others. The monk or nun know what they want a little better. They are guided by religious feeling, by a desire for achievement, for salvation. They trust their teacher who tells them what to do, and they believe that their effort and sacrifices are pleasing to God. Let's suppose that a week of fasting, continual prayer, privations and so on, enables them to attain what the fakir developed through a month of self-torture. The yogi knows considerably more. They know what they want, they know why they need it, they know how it can be acquired. They know, for example, that it is necessary for their purpose to produce a certain substance in themselves. They know that this substance can be produced in one day, through certain kinds of mental exercises, or concentration of consciousness. So they keep their attention on these exercises for an entire day, without allowing themselves one single outside thought, and thus obtain what they need. In this way a yogi spends on the same thing, only one day, compared with a month spent by the fakir, and a week spent by the monk. However, in the fourth way knowledge is still more exact and perfect. An individual who follows the fourth way knows precisely what substances they need for their aims, and they know that these substances can be produced within the body, by a month of physical suffering, by a week of emotional strain, or by a day of mental exercises. They also know they can be introduced into the organism from without, if it is known how to do it. So, instead of spending a whole day in exercises like the yogi, a week in prayer like the monk, or a month in self-torture like the fakir, they simply prepare and swallow a little tablet, which contains all the substances they want, and in this way, without loss of time, obtain the required results. It must be noted here, that in addition to these proper and legitimate ways, there are also artificial ways which give only temporary results, and wrong ways which may even give permanent results. In these ways, a person may seek the key to the fourth room, and sometimes find it. But what they find in the fourth room is not yet known. It also happens that the door to the fourth room is opened artificially, with a skeleton key. And in both of these cases the room may prove to be empty.